Welcome. It's lovely to see you. If you could introduce yourself and tell us what subjects you did at Sixth Form College.
Hi, I'm Adam, and I studied French, politics, history, and then did an EPQ. I'm at Jesus College, Oxford, studying history and politics at the moment.
Now, did you always know that you wanted to do history and politics from those A-levels? Tell us about how you got to deciding to do those two subjects.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a difficult choice actually, because I always knew that I was interested in politics. So kind of the natural course, people were kind of saying, oh, what about PPE? But then I kind of got more and more interested in the history side of things. I did the modern history A level, so kind of it was quite political anyway, and kind of thought, oh, actually, history I'm preferring to kind of the more maths related stuff to do with economics. So I thought, yeah, history and politics sounds interesting. Yeah, checked it out and then thought, yeah, this is actually what I want to do.
And that's fantastic. And I think a lot of students in that position of not quite knowing what subjects they're interested in, perhaps starting with one where you think you're going to be doing, go for PPE, but actually finding the one that really suits you best. So when you were at college, at what point did you realise you wanted to apply for Oxford? Did you always think you were going to go there? Tell me about the process of deciding to apply for Oxbridge.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always knew that I wanted to kind of go to a Russell Group uni and kind of thought, oh, well, Oxbridge looks really cool, kind of a big goal of a lot of people. So became interested in it and was like, this could be something that I could try, not necessarily destined to get in. But then thought, yeah, I'll go for it. I'd never actually been to Oxford or Cambridge. Luckily, I had a few study days that I went to in both Oxford and Cambridge. Obviously, they're both beautiful cities, but you do just get a vibe of where you feel more comfortable. And it was then I realised, oh, well, Oxford is the one that I preferred being in. So why not go for it?
I think you're absolutely right. It's so important to kind of think, right, well, I'm aiming at these kind of universities, and then to kind of whittle it down to the ones you really like. But you're right, it's the place, it's the feel, it's the course, all that kind of thing. So when you were towards the end of your first year, you started writing a personal statement. How did you go about doing that? What did you write about in your personal statement?
The first thing I did, I got out a pad of paper and just wrote down everything that I knew I'd done, extracurriculars, whether they were kind of academic or completely weird things that I'd done. I was listening to what they were saying from Oxford, their kind of advice for entry and stuff. And they were saying, listen to podcasts, do extra reading around your subject, to kind of make sure that I was looking at things that both were history and politics related, and then things that linked the two subjects. For Oxbridge personal statements and medic personal statements, you probably want about 90% to be academic and then 10% to be extracurricular. So yeah, started writing, kind of found a good layout that I liked, took it to people for advice and help. The one probably big piece of advice I would give would definitely be, don't try and start with the opening line. Don't try and perfect the opening line straight away, because it's so hard staring at a blank piece of paper. Your first line in your personal statement will not be the one that you write down first. There's no point trying to do a big flashy opening, because it's going to end up changing.
And so what did you write about, if you can remember, because it was a little while ago?
So I made, it was mostly academic. I opened with my views on a book that had been written by Hillary Clinton. I remember that quite well. It wasn't a quote at all, because I don't think quotes always go down incredibly well, because they're probably a bit cliche. But it's probably better to kind of say perhaps a book you've read and then give your opinion on it, rather than just say what someone else has been saying. So yeah, I discussed that. I then went through my A levels one by one, saying what I did in them, what extracurricular things I'd shown that I'd gone above and beyond my subject. But then also linking, so for example, I did French, which obviously isn't history or politics, which was my degree, but I showed that in one of the independent research projects, I'd written about French politics and the elections in France, and then went back to kind of discussing some of the extra literature I'd read. I think I spoke about Machiavelli, kind of talking about him in modern day politics, because it was kind of quite a good book to read given our current political situation. So it shows that you're interested in both theory and historical literature, but also kind of modern day, you're up to date with the news. And yeah, and then the last few sentences I spoke about extracurriculars I'd done, Duke of Edinburgh and stuff like that, just to tie it all together, show that I'd done stuff outside of academics.
That sounds fantastic, and a really comprehensive kind of going through your personal statement. And then, so you sent off your personal statement. Did they ask for any written work? Tell us about your process of interviews.
It was only history work that they wanted. The politics department didn't ask for anything. So they wanted an essay which had been written under exam conditions, which I'd just done kind of in a classroom test. And they wanted your teacher to mark it, and then you had to send off some paperwork with it to show that it had been marked by your teacher. And then also I had to sit an admissions test, which was a history one. So I did that. I think it was an hour and a half, sat in the Performing Arts Theatre. And yeah, it was quite nerve-wracking, but everyone's in the same boat. Yeah, and then got invited to interviews, which I had two interviews. They're both on the same day, and you had an hour preparation time or 40 minutes preparation time, and then a 20-minute interview. And both interviews were separated into two 10-minute parts, one history, one politics. In each interview, there was social movements and my Russian history coursework in the first one, which was with kind of an expert on European history, which was really interesting. And then in my second one, I spoke about wealth inequality for politics. And then we ended up discussing some history, which I'd never ever done before. I walked in and the tutor said, have you ever studied kind of early modern or Tudor history? And I said, no, I've not studied that at all because I did the modern A level and I didn't do GCSE. And she said, oh, that's perfect, that we can discuss that then. Which was obviously quite terrifying, but it wasn't too bad. And they were much more looking for your skills and how you approached it than what you could just regurgitate.
And I think that's really important. The things you said about, for example, supercurricular and reading beyond your subjects, like podcasts and that kind of thing, actually would have developed your historical knowledge across different spectrums. And then actually that's often what I say in reach lessons, as I say, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because in interviews for Oxford or Cambridge or medicine or some of the other top universities that do interview, they'll ask you on some things that you might well know at first, but then they'll take you beyond what you've done in, let's say, maths or what you've done in history. And actually then they can see whether you've got genuine interest, although I can imagine at the time that must have felt quite nerve-wracking. And did you get interviewed at the place you'd applied for? So which college did you apply to? Because you're now at Jesus.
Yeah, so I'm now at Jesus, but I originally actually applied to Brasenose. I'd been on a study day there and I thought, this is really nice. And so, yeah, I applied there. And then got an email just after my admissions test from Brasenose saying, you'll get an email from Jesus soon. We're not interviewing you, but don't worry, you're still being interviewed. So it was a bit of a shock. But then, yeah, a few minutes later, I got an email off Jesus saying, hi, like we'd love to interview you. So I think it's about 1 in 5 go to a different college. But I mean, you always end up loving the college that you end up going to. And now I look at friends of mine at Brasenose and think, oh, I'm glad that I'm at Jesus.
We have a lot of students who apply to a college and then either get pooled if you're applying to Cambridge or they go to another college at Oxford. And I think of it as the opposite of a negative. And actually, the interesting thing is that means too many people applied to, let's say, Brasenose for your subjects. And they were thinking, this student is so fantastic, we can't let them go. And so what they do is they then discuss with other colleagues at other colleges and say, this candidate's outstanding, you have to interview them. The other college then says, actually, yeah, your candidate is better than the ones who applied to us. And so I think that's really fantastic because all the colleges across Cambridge and Oxford have such a good system of making sure that it is fair. And actually that means that somewhere someone actually thought you were so fantastic they didn't want you to go and even talk to other colleges about how fantastic you are and why you should be interviewed. So I think that's actually a kind of odd compliment, but you're right, and often the right college is then the one that you're fitted with.
It's important, I mean, to if you're going on a study day or you're going on an open day, to not kind of set your hearts on one college, because so many of them have a lot of similar characteristics and personalities to them.
Tell us about how Oxford learning goes. So this is the same for Oxford and Cambridge. What's the education like there?
Yeah, so in Oxford we call them tutorials, in Cambridge they call them supervisions, and it's basically 1 or 2 students and then a tutor who you submit an essay to them before the tutorial, and you go in and talk to them for an hour and a bit and just discuss your essay, discuss around the essay. So it's kind of a really brilliant opportunity to kind of speak with an expert in the subject about something you've written, you've produced it, and they're taking it really seriously as a piece of scholarly work. So it's really, it can be nerve-wracking, but also, it's a really beneficial experience. In first year, I had all my tutorials on my own. So kind of, it was just one-on-one, sat in a room with my tutor, which was quite daunting, but also you learn so much because you have to know your stuff to be able to kind of rebut them if they say anything. So yeah, no, it's a lot of fun, and it's a way that you really can personalize your learning to things you're interested in.
Do you get any flexibility in the way you choose topics and subjects, and how does that work? Because the other thing is often my students are looking at prospectuses and kind of thinking, what if I want to do this area of politics, or how do I know if the course covers this? How much flexibility is there for you?
It depends quite a bit by subject. For degrees like law, it's a bit more set in structure because of kind of the requirements by the law faculty. But with history and politics, I had such a huge range of things that I could study. Even from kind of the second that I stepped in Oxford, I only had one compulsory paper that I had to study, and that was for politics. And then I did 2 politics papers, 2 history. My other politics paper, I could choose. It was different types of theory. So kind of broadly the same, but you kind of still had your way of approaching it. And then in history, you have such unbelievable freedom to pick what you want to choose. So in first year, I studied modern European and world history, and that was kind of between 1815 and 1914. But that was kind of one paper of papers which stretched all the way back to kind of 300 AD. And that was just for Europe. And then for British papers, you could pick from about 100 AD up until 1951. So there are so many options that you can pick, or you're allowed to kind of pick language papers. You can study a text in its original language, which is really useful if you've got language skills and want to keep them up.
I think that's the other thing that a lot of students wonder about, is exactly that. Can they keep up a language? What facilities are there for doing that? And also, for example, that ability to be flexible and do things like international politics and relations and that kind of thing, rather than doing a very specific degree in it. And then what happens from here on out? So how much choice is there now, and what do you go through in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so in second and third year, there's even more choice. I had no compulsory papers at all, apart from my dissertation, which I then could choose whether I wanted to do one on politics or history.
Brilliant.
So it really doesn't matter. So yeah, it ends up in your second and third year, you pick some core modules, which are kind of more broad, big themes. So whether that's kind of comparative government or international relations. And then you can pick kind of countries. So there's the economy of Japan. There's one about China. I'm studying one in America at the moment. There's kind of so much breadth and thematic choice that you can find something that you love.
That is so fantastic. Now, tell us, you went to a state secondary school and then you came to Sixth Form College. You're from Wales. Tell us, what's it like being from a state school at Oxford? What's it like for normal people like us?
There are so many normal people in Oxford. There are so many normal people. No one goes around asking what school you came from. Really, no one cares. No one cares what A levels you did. They kind of just want to know what college you're at, for a bit of competition. Perhaps if you've got a kind of subject in you're doing the same subjects or whatever. And there are actually societies which you can go to which kind of promote and kind of bring together state school students, first generation students, to make sure they really feel welcome. The one thing I would say is that if Oxford and Cambridge and kind of some of the top universities are going to change, then it requires people from state schools going to them. Clever people from state schools who kind of go and love their subject and who really put in the effort to go, because otherwise it's not going to change.
The other fantastic thing, if students, for example, are from a family with a lower income, and actually the great thing about both Oxford and Cambridge is there's a lot of bursary support, and that's definitely something I would recommend as well. And exactly as you said, these universities, the top universities that I work with regularly, Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, Bristol, Birmingham, to name a few, are looking for, exactly as you said, students who love their subject, who are really, really driven. And actually that's what they want to see. Personal statement, that's where they see your passion for your subject, your real joy in it, and what you've done beyond your subject. Now, very important, Adam, I've heard a rumour that there is no fun at Oxford. Is this true?
Absolutely not. There is so much that you can do, whether it's, involves drinking, doesn't involve drinking, extracurricular societies, debating societies, things like the Oxford Union, but also sports. Lots of people pick up rowing for the first time. Whether you just want to represent your college, represent the uni, there are so many opportunities, and you have things, both within your colleges and outside. So obviously there are lots of clubs in Oxford. It's actually got a very good nightlife, but also things in colleges. So for example, BOPs, which are big organised parties, which are held within your college. It's a lot of fun. Everyone can play their own music. It's like being at a school disco, but a lot more fun. Things like student journalism means that actually you can get involved with so much outside of your degree, which is both a lot of fun, but also helps with your skills in your degree and then also with your career in the future.
If you were in year 12 now, what would your final hints and tips be?
I mean, I think the biggest thing would be to make sure that you're doing things to both help your A levels, but also kind of help your extracurriculars. Obviously, if you get an offer to Oxbridge, that's incredible, but you need to then still meet grades. So making sure that you're on top of all your A levels and making sure that you know your subjects. It's so easy to just stick on a podcast when you're, cleaning or cooking or going for a run or a bike ride. Watching documentaries is so easy when you're eating dinner, and it means that you're exposed to a lot of different arguments about, for example, historical things or political things. which kind of both maybe good put on your personal statement, but also then makes you formulate arguments in your head, which is going to make you a stronger candidate. Reading around your subjects, you're a subscriber of The Economist or another kind of newspaper or magazine, then they're all things that you can put straight onto your personal statement and make you stand out.
I think that's an excellent point as well. Articles are so useful for personal statements because actually they're the kind of thing that the night before an interview you could look it over. And I also think the other thing that's really important for students who are currently in year 12 is that if they do get behind, then start again today and make sure you kind of keep up where you can. But if necessary, we've got a big college, there's lots of support available. And so they can always go and sit in first year classes if they really struggled with the content of any modules. So I think that's the good thing, is we've got that kind of plan in place that if needs be, they could always pop back in and relearn the stuff while we were out at distance. Adam, thank you so much for your help, and it's so good to catch up with you. Just such invaluable advice. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much.